Aloha and welcome to the second installment of the Bird's Nest podcast. I'm your host, Paul Domowitch, formerly of the Philadelphia Inquirer and Daily News, and now the busiest semi-retired man in America. I write for the 33rdteam.com website and a couple of other websites. I co-host an in-season radio show on WBCB radio. I'm writing a book on Sam Mills, the Hall of Fame linebacker, and now I'm hosting this podcast. We had a really great first show last week with Merrill Reese, and we have, I believe, a terrific show today with former Eagles executive Joe Banner, who will be joining me shortly. Joe spent 18 years, as most of you know, with as the chief executive for the Eagles. During those 18 years, the team went to 11 playoff appearances, made it to the NFC Championship game 5 times, the Super Bowl once, won 6 division titles. He and Jeffrey Lurie, the owner who he came to Philadelphia with, hired the first black coach in franchise history, Ray Rhodes, who coached in the 90s for the Eagles, and he hired the first black general manager, John Wooten, who was a semifinalist for the Hall of Fame. So. Anyway, welcome to the show. Joe will be on shortly. He just texted me that he's having trouble getting in, which our producer Ralph hopefully can help him with. A few notes before we get Joe. The first preseason game for the Eagles is this Saturday at Baltimore. They'll be playing the Ravens. You can probably expect to see the starters play a series like they did last year when Jalen Hurts went 6 for 6, threw a touchdown pass on that first series, and then both he and the starters weren't seen again for the rest of the preseason. That probably will be the case again this year, unless you have season tickets to the Eagles and can get into the joint workouts against the Cleveland Browns next week and the Colts the week after. You won't be seeing them again until the September 10th season opener against the Patriots. So, Ralph, do we have Joe yet? If not, let's break for a commercial, and our first commercial, and see if we can find him, because he's texting me that he's trying to get in. He says he may need some help. So can we break for a commercial? No. Okay. Quickly, before Joe comes on, let me tell you what he's been up to. Left the Eagles in 2011. Spent 2 years as a CEO for the Cleveland Browns after that. Hang on a second. Let me see if let me just give Ralph his Joe Banner's information. Ralph, can we break for a commercial, please, and get this straightened out?
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
Hang on a minute, folks. Just sending my producer Joe's number so we can get this straightened out and get him on the line. And it figures that I would have this problem on my second show. Anyway, as I was saying, Joe left the Eagles 2011, was a CEO for the Cleveland Browns for 2 years. Also served as a senior consultant for the Atlanta Falcons for a couple of years after that. And then got into an interesting, he's the co-founder of the one of the websites I work for, the 33rd Team. He and Mike Tannenbaum, the former general manager of the Jets and Dolphins, co-founded the 33rdteam.com website, which is in the short time it's been around, which is about 3 years, has become one of the fastest growing pro football websites in the country. It's got a roster of all-star analysts that includes, besides terrific writers like myself and Vic Carucci, Clark Judge, and Barry Wilner, who all of us who probably together have about 200 years of experience as pro football writers. It's also got analysts that include former Eagle Chris Long, former NFL MVP Rich Gannon, Bill Cowher, Bill Parcells, Marvin Lewis, Mike Martz, Marty Morningwig, the former Eagles offensive coordinator, recently inducted Hall of Famer Rondé Barber is one of several players that are analysts, along with Eddie George, Greg Jennings, and we got executives like Bill Poley and a Hall of Famer, Rick Spielman, Joe, and former NFL supervisor of officials, Dean Blandino, also is an analyst for the 33rd Team. So. A couple of things I'm hoping to talk to Joe about once we get him on here is Jalen Hurts. Jalen, not only the night and day improvement he made last year, but also signed his new contract this past off season. Signed a 5-year, $255 million contract that at the time made him was the top contract ever given out. Since then, it's been eclipsed by a few million by Joe Burrow. But it's I wanted to talk to Joe about the contract. It's, Howie Roseman did a terrific job, I think, of structuring it so that it's not going to impact the Eagles too much as far as their ability to sign and retain their own veteran players. It really doesn't have, really doesn't for this year. He's still basically on his extension or on his rookie contract, and then the first few years of the contract are minimal before it really, before they have to start moving, chess pieces around. To at that point they'll probably just restructure his deal. So they've had a good preseason so far. Jalen's looked good. He's clearly he and the new offensive coordinator Brian Johnson, who was his former quarterbacks coach, who was before that his former friend for years and years since he was a little tyke back in Texas. They're working together really well, and it's Jalen's in third year of the same offense for the first time in his life. So that's he's one of one of the things I want to talk to Joe about is whether he's hit the ceiling yet. I mean, Joe is ready. Let's get Joe on. Hey, Joe. Joe, can you hear me? Can't hear you, Joe. Are you on mute? There we go. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You got me?
There you go. Great. Yeah, can you hear me? Terrific. How you doing? Good to have you on the show.
That's what happened when old guys trying to deal with technology.
That's without Ralph, I'd be lost.
Yeah.
Joe, before we get into the Eagles in the NFL, I was telling people a little bit about the 33rd team. I came aboard as a writer a couple of years back after I took the buyout from the Inquirer. Tell me how you and Mike came up with the idea of a website, a pro football website, which, as I mentioned earlier, in a few short years has turned into one of the fastest growing websites, pro football websites in America.
Yeah. So originally, Mike actually had the idea of a combination of we were doing what we call a Wednesday call, where we had a number of NFL head coaches, GMs, in some places some players, former players, just got on the phone for an hour every week on Wednesdays and just talked football from a fairly knowledgeable and interesting perspective, because you had people from a lot of different backgrounds. And at the same time, Mike had a passion for supporting young people that wanted to get into sports. So we were trying to help those people and kind of come up with a vehicle to do it. And we're trying to figure out ways to help kind of educate them, further them, develop something they could showcase to get into the NFL, because they were mostly interns that had long-term aspirations to work. Mm-hmm. And we created the website, frankly, as a vehicle to, push forward the philanthropic idea. And lo and behold, we started getting some positive feedback. We had a lot of former coaches and general managers that wanted to mentor some of these young people. And without making the story too long, it developed into what now, as you say, has become a really vibrant site that has developed quite a following. And, we're optimistic about where it's here. We think it has the best analysis of what's going on in football from people that actually did it, of anything, even including the networks. Our list of contributors, and obviously ESPN and the NFL Network have really impressive contributors as well, but our list of almost 50 people that you'd recognize almost every name, we think is, without any comparison out there.
Yeah, I went down, mentioned quite a few of them a little bit earlier while Ralph was getting you on. I mean, it's just a head shaking list. There's a lot of, hell, Rondé Barber was inducted into the Hall of Fame last week. I mean, you've got, I think, at least a half a dozen Hall of Famers that are contributors. So, but let's moving on to the Eagles, Joe. Talked a little bit last week when Merrill Reese was on about this. The Eagles are right now probably are considered by a lot of people the most talented team in the NFL. Yet, the history shows that it's not going to be easy for them to get back. I mean, one team since in the salary cap era has made it back to the Super Bowl a year after losing, and that was the Patriots after they lost to the Eagles in 2017. Got back the next year and beat the Rams. I mean, better than anybody the difficulty when you go back to 2004. You guys lost to the Patriots in Super Bowl 39. A year later, still optimistic, but that was the year of the TO explosion, the sports hernia, Donovan McNabb sports hernia, which I think he missed about 7 or 8 games. So, I mean, everything, there's just so many variables that go into it that it's really difficult to get back. I mean, what is the most difficult thing about trying to take a team that's either won or lost in the Super Bowl and get them back there the next year?
The answer is very intangible. I mean, we're all humans. We have ups and downs. When you just put everything you have into something, which you can feel guaranteed that the teams that made it to the Super Bowl just have, incredible effort, determination, great leadership. I mean, there's just a series of boxes you have to check. You're not even getting there. Is normally kind of an emotional letdown afterwards. And of course, you've played later than everybody, so you have less recovery time, less rebuilding the team time. But I really think it's mostly emotional. It's just really hard to sustain yourself at that high level for that long, especially in the middle of it, having such a major emotional letdown. I don't care what anybody tells you. Go to the Super Bowl. It feels great going. But if you come out with a loss, it's just indescribably painful. And all of the dreams you had from parades and friends and rings and everything else like that just went up in smoke. 5 months of direct work on the team, really a year of putting it together. And you feel like, we didn't get where we wanted to, even though most of the league would consider a success to at least get to the Super Bowl. So I think the hardest thing is the emotions of it and the roller coaster that we just all go through as human beings, with up and downs as we experience some disappointments. I think that's the hardest part to overcome.
In talking to players and coaches, when I did a story on it last year on the difficulty in repeating and getting back, I mean, a lot of them mentioned that it's just this, you're starting all over again, and you've got to take it a step by step. I mean, as much as we hate to hear people hate to hear coaches talk about game by game. When you've been to the Super Bowl, the next year you just want to flip a switch and at least get back to the playoffs and start there. And that's just not the way it works.
Exactly. I mean, you feel like, okay, our season doesn't really matter until we get to the playoffs. So it's very hard to maintain that, peak performance, peak, mental place you need to be for all the weeks just to get there. And the games of the regular season do feel less important. They're not, obviously.
Yeah.
You get to the playoffs, you need to position yourself to have the best possible seed. But once you've played in a Super Bowl and gone through a lengthy playoff run, even, I mean, at one point we went to 5 championship games in 8 years, there was still a big emotional, letdown that we had to recover from. Yeah. Now, that emotional letdown also comes with it an added determination, because you got stopped even more prematurely of where you were trying to get to. For whatever reason, just looking at the history you already spoke to, the emotional letdown of losing the game is even more hard to overcome, or more difficult to overcome than the loss of the championship game. By the way, both are difficult. Both come with great, a trough of emotion that's hard to describe, to somebody that hasn't felt it or maybe been as close to teams as you've been. But it's even harder once you've actually gone to the game and you truly had the taste of the weeks leading up to the game. All the energy that comes from the city, your family, all of that kind of stuff. And then suddenly there's no practice, there's no game, there's nothing to anticipate. All of the teams you had and pictures you had in your head just aren't going to happen for that year. It's really hard. It takes a really, really strong person to maintain that level of mental strength after that kind of a letdown.
Yeah. If the Eagles are going to get back this year, Joe, Jalen Hurts obviously is going to be an integral part of it, or have to be an integral part of it. The improvement he made last year it's hard to believe when you look at his 2021 season and then last year. I mean, he went from 22nd to 4th in passer rating, from 26th to 11th in completion percentage, 15th to 3rd in yards per attempt, 13th to 5th in interception percentage. I guess the question now everyone is asking is, has he hit a ceiling, or is there still a lot of room for improvement in this kid? I mean, you've watched him. Because this used to be a team you worked for. You're obviously follow it closely. I mean, what are your thoughts on Jalen right now, and whether the ceiling still has yet to be reached?
Well, I think it's hard to believe that after 3 years, a player doesn't have room to grow. So I'm assuming that he can get even better. Now, that may be more mental acuity, processing, anticipating defense is better than we're necessarily going to see him throw the ball or run the ball better. I mean, he did that at an awfully high level, a whole lot of room to get better, especially within kind of the scheme they're running. But what I'm interested to see is, historically, we've seen changes on offense result in changes on defense that make it harder for the people that initially made the changes in offense to sustain that level of play. So, for example, the West Coast offense was dominant. After a few years, defenses started to make some adjustments that made it better. It was still a very good offense. A lot of teams are using it to this day successfully. It's still a very good offense, but it wasn't such a unique and progressive scheme that by itself it made the team better. I do think all of the young, extremely mobile quarterbacks are benefiting from that right now. It's not limited to Jalen. Well, we're in the phase where that offense has taken a step forward, and now the defense is going to try to adjust and catch up. So I'd be surprised if he doesn't play as well or better, but it's also possible that he could play as well or better and the results won't be as good. And we won't know that until we start to see what adjustments in general, not to the Eagles, but in general, our defenses are only making to the evolution of these mobile quarterbacks that are able to run and, really affect the pass rush dramatically, because it's even more uncertain. And, what are they going to do, on this play? So that will be the big test for Jalen in my mind. And frankly, the offensive coaches and Nick, as the defense evolves to do at least a better job against what they've brought into play here in the last few years, can they keep up with that change so that the advantage that the scheme created for Hurts and the entire offense continues to be there? I mean, the talent is such that it's really hard to picture anything shutting them down. But could it create a 10%, a 15% less effective offense by some defense adjustments? To me, that isn't crazy, but I'm not necessarily predicting it either, because honestly, I have a hard time picturing what that would be. So it will be really interesting to me to see, as we watch teams with these mobile quarterbacks playing defenses, if they're still playing in the same way they did the last year or two.
Yeah. Now, everyone that's been skeptical of quarterbacks that run as much as Jalen does, I mean, the thing that they're concerned about is durability, how long they can last. I mean, Jalen ran 165 times last year. That's the most of any quarterback in the league. That's more than Justin Fields, more than Lamar Jackson, who, Lamar Jackson is starting to kind of pay the toll for his running with injuries. Now, when you look at Jalen's number, it's tempered by the fact that I think, if I counted right, about 30 of them were quarterback sneaks. Another 20 were victory formation kneel downs. So it's not as high as it looks, but it's still a lot. And he took some hits, missed a couple of games. Can he keep running like that? Or do you think they need to cut it down a little bit?
Well, let's use the real number, as you indicate. It's really around 100.
Right.
I don't think they really want to sustain that kind of a level. But I don't think it's also the end of the world, or has us sitting here going, well, if they do that again, well, he'll never stay healthy. I don't believe either of those things are true. But it would also be smart. Listen, the Ravens now, after Lamar got hurt 2 years in a row, forget all the contract stuff and everything, it's extraneous noise. They've switched to an offensive coordinator, and they've went out and got way more better weapons than they've ever had, with a clear intent to try to take some of the pressure and stress off the risk of him getting hurt. The Eagles are already in a position where they kind of have the players to do that if they decide to do it. And I would encourage them to do it. And frankly, I still think we're going to see Jalen run enough that the defense has to factor that into every single snap. But in an ideal world, it would decrease some from that number around 100. And, they'd utilize the weapons they have. I'm in the school, which seems to be pretty broad-based right now, thinking we haven't even seen close to what Devontae Smith is capable of. So assuming him both stay healthy, obviously Goddard, the backfield is actually better if it stays healthy. I think it would be wise for them to try to orient more and more towards passing, but still running him enough that it's a real crucial thing for the defense to prepare for all week and then worry about every time they snap the ball.
I thought they got a big break from the competition committee and the owners during the offseason, and the fact that they did not banish the tush push. I mean, that was a big time play for them last year. They had the wherewithal under Nick Sirianni to kind of orchestrate the quarterback sneak and turned it into a real weapon. I mean, it kept drives alive. they had no when 4th and 1 was an automatic go for it unless it was a really long 4th and 1. I think we're going to see that from other teams this year. But I thought it was going to get voted down. I thought it was going to become illegal, and it didn't.
Yeah, I'm with you. I thought it was going to get made illegal. I mean, it's not that long ago that it was illegal to push a quarterback from behind. No one seemed to when they changed that rule except the Eagles. And, they got a tremendous benefit from it. If you can get into 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1, and basically, you're virtually guaranteed of getting a first down. So the rest of the league is playing 1st and 10. You're really playing, it's like 1st 8.5. And you may even have 4 downs to get the 8.5, 3 downs to get the 8.5 yards because you can go for it on 4th down. You're as close to guaranteed of retaining the ball as you can get. I mean, that changes the mindset of everything. I mean, it's a huge advantage beyond keeping the ball, which we know how important that is. I mean, it's got to be demoralizing to the defense. It's got to help the offensive confidence that we can hold on to the ball, and it's got to free up the play caller to feel like he can do more things, and it's less of a risk to do so.
Each week we do a agree or disagree question, and this week it's will Jalen Hurts complete 70% of his passes? Last year it jumped from 61 to 66. 70 is a big leap. I think I counted over the last 12 years, only 9 players have done it. Drew Brees did it 5 times, but there's been a few others, including Joey Burrow a couple of years ago. I guess the reason I think I agree that he will, or at least can, is because of the fact that, I think this year, Joe, that they are going to use their running backs more than they have in the last 2 years, throwing to them. Not necessarily dump offs, but they acquired DeAndre Swift, who is one of the league's top pass catching backs. They've got Kenny Gainwell. These are 2 people you can move all around the formation. And my feeling is, you talked earlier about how defenses adjust to what offenses do. We're going to see that this year. We're going to see defenses try to lock down A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith on the outside. Now, to do that, you're going to have to double team those people. But the option, and another option for not making Jalen run as much, is to let him throw it, to open running backs and let them in space and let them do things. So that obviously improves the completion percentage if he can do that. But I think that's one of the reasons they got Swift, because of the fact that he can have such an impact on the passing game.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reality is the Eagles have been playing from team building to game day with a pretty similar mindset philosophy for a very long time. So the fact that they actually went a couple of years without throwing to the back a lot was the exception, as opposed to what I think is kind of the new way. So I do think by acquiring Swift and having Gainwell, their opportunity to throw the ball to the backs, create mismatches on linebackers, and have 2nd and 5s turn into something they're converting quite frequently into first downs is highly likely. 70% is still quite an achievement. So I'm not sure whether I'm going over or under on that one, but I absolutely think that they should throw the backs more, and it's going to help him and make it even harder on the defense. So I think I'll go under, though, just for the record, so I don't look like I'm dodging it.
If you asked Eagles fans if they recalled what quarterback for the Eagles did it, a few would remember that it was Sam Bradford in 2015, I believe. 71. Yeah, I mean, Sam had his faults, but mostly couldn't stay healthy. But he was as accurate a quarterback as we've seen in a long time. It just he just couldn't stay in a game for more than a couple of quarters. Joe, one more question on Jalen. We've talked before about Jalen's contract. I know you felt he would have been better off signing a 3 or 4 year deal because it would give him a chance to get a bite of the apple quicker, since you see the cap going up so much in the coming years. But what are your thoughts overall on Jalen's contract, how it's structured, and when it's going to impact their ability, if and when it's going to impact their ability to sign other players and re-sign their own?
Yeah, so I think the most important issue for a player on a contract at his age, at his position, at his level of talent is the average per year. And frankly, that came in at exactly where an educated person who follows the cap closely would have guessed. So I mean, solid on both sides. The Eagles paid him what they should have, and he wasn't, trying to squeeze the last dollar out of the thing. He wanted to get it to kind of a fair, respectful place, and it did. I think that you could make a case that he could have done a little better on the guarantees, although it's solid. The one area, in addition to the years, which you already mentioned, so I won't waste any of our time on, I think the cash flow of the deal was just okay from the player's perspective, and he probably had the levers to do a little better. Probably an extremely high probability, like in the 90s, it doesn't matter at all. I mean, the chance that he doesn't collect everything in this contract is really, really small. Just star players that are in their mid-20s, that play key positions, that sign new deals, despite what other people say, almost always collect all their money or do another extension before that deal ends. So the guarantees in this deal, the cash flow, are much less important than most. So I would just say the Eagles paid him fairly. Other than length, I think he got a very reasonable deal. He's going to be a very wealthy guy and is well taken care of. The length, though, will affect his career earnings quite significantly because the cap is going to go up so much. And if he had a 3-year extension, he'd still be committed to the team, for 4 more years, 4-year extension, 5 more years. So if I was representing him, I would have pushed him really hard to fight harder for a shorter deal. But other than that, it's just a solid deal. The team paid him fairly and well, and he got a deal that, based on his accomplishments, was totally reasonable to accept.
Now, will they have to? I mean, I'm looking at the year-by-year cap hit. I mean, he's still on his first year contract this year, pretty much. Goes up to 13 next year, 21 the next, 31 in 2026, and 45 the year after that. Is that at that point in his contract, you expect them at that point to probably, that's when you talk, assuming he's still a prolific player, that you talk about restructuring?
Yeah. Yeah, you're probably doing, I would refer to it as an extension. So it will factor in the 2 existing years. They won't just pretend they don't exist, but they'll add some years, they'll structure the payments, they'll reduce the cap number, and they'll be able to postpone him being, once he gets into the 30s, it does probably affect some decisions. But even in the 30s, by what the cap will be then, they'll be able to build the roster that they want to. They won't be making huge sacrifices in order to accommodate him. So I really look out a good 4 to 6 years, assuming that they are talking extension, would be 2 years left on this new deal. At least 4 years that this is really not a serious consideration. We'll still allow them the flexibility to build the team they want around him for the most part. If they haven't succeeded in restructuring or extending the deal at that point, it's going to get a little bit more difficult, although it's still doable. And then by the time they hit that $45 million number, the cap could easily be close to $100 million, let's say $80 to $100 million higher than it is now.
Right.
So even the 5 number, which sounds really big, will be something they could easily swallow and still be capable of going back to Super Bowls.
Now, I mean, for much of the time you were here, I mean, the cap wasn't going up at that rate, and you had to be really good at managing it, and you were. Has it become less of a priority now because of the cap going up so much? I mean, are you seeing teams where, I'm not saying anybody could do it, but where you just keep pushing money into the future and you can fairly manage the cap pretty easily?
Yeah, but I don't want to make that an absolute. People need to realize the Eagles have, I think it's $40+ million in miscellaneous charges this year. And they lost starters. They're confident between the running back trade and some young players that they believe in that they won't pay a price for that. But believe me, they would have rather kept some of those or more of those players if there wasn't, some cap strategy to it. So, listen, I think they did the right thing. When the cap was tight and not going up a lot, the right thing to do, I think, was what we did, which was write deals reasonably flat, use the modest increases in the cap to sign additional players or extend additional players and not lose the ones we already had. Once the cap started up a lot, that was no longer the best strategy. I give them a lot of credit for recognizing that and changing how they were doing things, because a lot of teams, once they're doing things a certain way, they just keep doing it that way, especially if they're having reasonable success. They recognized that when the cap was going up a lot, that right strategy was no longer the right strategy, and they made the adjustment to being more aggressive and starting deals with lower cap numbers that built into higher cap numbers, being somewhat less afraid of potential future miscellaneous charges. Frankly, if I'd been managing the cap as that change took place, I would have advocated, what they were doing. And they were very smart to anticipate that. A lot of teams didn't realize for 2 or 3 years, some still don't, frankly, that it should change your cap management philosophy. And they're falling behind the teams like the Eagles and others that have recognized that the amount the cap is going up on an annual basis should affect how you manage the cap. And the specific answer to your question is yes, it is easier to manage the cap when you have to be less worried about the cost of every single mistake you made. You're going to make some mistakes. So what you want to do is minimize the impact that those mistakes have. And when the cap is going up a lot, since the price is less, then you shouldn't be as afraid of taking risks or pushing cap charges out further into the future. Now, you can still take that too far, and you got to be smart about it. But I think they've done a great job of changing the strategy that fit with the growth of the cap and put them at an advantage for a couple of years while everybody else was still figuring that out.
Yeah. Joe, I'm going to ask you about the guy in charge of that strategy and their player acquisition in just a second. We got to take a 30-second commercial break.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
We're back with Joe Banner, and now we're going to talk about the Eagles GM, Howie Roseman. Nobody knows him better than you, Joe. You hired him 23 years ago as an intern out of Fordham Law in 2000. He's had a really interesting career. There have been times, you go back to 2014, loses the power struggle after being named GM. Chip Kelly ends up wrestling the power away from him, and Howie has moved to the other side of the building, returns, wins a Super Bowl. We get to 2020 when they fired Doug Peterson, and people are want to know why Howie isn't on the firing line either. But we're talking about a guy that has won 2 NFL Executive of the Year awards in the last 6 years. He's completely rebuilt this team into a team that, as I said earlier, might be the most talented in the NFL. This is a broad question, but tell me about his. Are you there, Joe? Ralph, I can't hear you. This is a broad question, but tell me about Howie's evolution. I mean, he's taken a lot of hits, and right now he's riding really high. I mean, there aren't too many people that win 2 Executive of the Year awards in 6 years, take a team to the Super Bowl twice, win one. Tell me your thoughts on his growth.
Yeah, listen, I guess 2 points. First of all, I'm not in the school of thinking that they even have close to the best roster in football. So kind of hear my comments in that context. By the way, the NFC has its challenges, and I won't be shocked if they're back at the Super Bowl. I also won't be shocked if they don't get quite that far. But that's not in any way a detraction from your question. I think it's less of an evolution than people think. In other words, I think he was probably getting more criticism than he deserved before, and it left people, including the owner of the team, frankly, who benched him at one point. And at times, even within the building, before he became GM, that there were people that thought that was, a bad idea. I obviously was never there. As you say, I hired him. He had no background. He'd never actually had a real job. He had no background in football. He had never even been the ball boy for the football team. On the things that separate him, in my mind, are the team building philosophy, the fearlessness and aggressiveness, and the real consistent commitment and a set of principles that get applied to everything that he does, whether it's the medical staff, whether the analytics team, whether it's the focus on the lines that, you've seen. He probably took our obsession with that even to another level. But I watched an insane amount of tape with Howie, even before he started watching tape with a lot of people and learning from a variety of people. Obviously worked with him closely on the cap part of it, the strategy part of it. I think the only thing that has really changed, and I don't mean to belittle it because I actually think it's huge, is when he sort of, for lack of a better term, got benched. It made him even more fearless. And it made him think more like, if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down doing what I believe in, not just trying to build a consensus, reflect, what the coach wants me to do. He's an expert on coaching. I've been put in the position to be the expert on personnel. And he became more assertive and more willing to take, risks, and even more passionate about executing what he believed in from a team building philosophy. So for me, that's what separates the before the benching period, where I think he deserved more credit than he got, but obviously he made mistakes that were worthy of criticism and kept the team from being quite as good as it's been the last 6 years, was even the higher level of coverage, fearlessness, didn't care if he got blamed for things, kind of was going to do it his way. I think that took him to even a higher level, even though I think he was already at a high level more so than he was getting credit for. And that really, the league is driven, as you know, by people that are oftentimes as concerned with self-preservation as they are with just enacting what they believe in. And once he went through that experience, I think he was like, I don't give a damn. He just didn't want to go down and not have done it the way he really believed it should be done, and really asserting himself, still being collaborative. But in the end, if he really believed in something, that's what they were going to do. And again, in every facet, I'm not just talking about who they're going to pick in the first round or which free agent they're going to sign. Every aspect of how they run that team is ahead of what most people are doing in the league. A lot of that never got noticed. I mean, and we did this for a long time, but he led the league in, signing undrafted free agents. Well, that's the most inefficient market in the entire NFL. You get a player without using up any assets and without using up any money. If you just have 2 to 3 starters that are undrafted free agents, as we did in kind of the Andy Reid era, where he almost had safeties and centers, mostly sometimes guards, were undrafted free agents, it creates an incredible amount of advantage and flexibility in the rest of the roster building and cap management. So I just give him credit for being fearless and being aggressive, looking at every opportunity for even the smallest incremental improvement of the team, and never being afraid to pull the trigger. I really think their player evaluations are good, but they don't separate them from the pack. I think it's this aggressiveness and fearlessness, and no matter how small a move is, if it makes you even a tiny bit better, not being afraid of making that move, that's what's really different than them than any other team in the league still.
Yeah. Do you think their success will change that? I mean, sometimes teams get good for a while and the people running the team are a little bit afraid to take risks. Do you think that will ever change with regard to Howie?
I don't think he'll ever get risk averse. He could become more risk averse, but the thing that makes me hopeful that he's not, and that they're really doing a great job of learning through their experiences. When they won the first Super Bowl, almost everybody who wins a championship, and this is true in all sports, the instinct to keep it all together. Oh my God, let's just keep it together. But listen, of age affects people, injuries affect people, scheme affects people. And so they did a little bit fall into the trap after this first Super Bowl of thinking, let's just keep it all together. We got a great team here. Why wouldn't we repeat? This time they didn't do that. As we said, they've lost 7 starters. So I think if you want to increase your chances of repeating, at least going to the Super Bowl, the idea of not being afraid to lose some players, trust some young guys, bring in some fresh blood, bring in some people that have that determination because they've never been there. They have that drive, holding on to your key leaders. I would advise anybody, not just the Eagles, if you're coming off a Super Bowl, that's the right approach. So it's very conspicuous to me that they changed their post-Super Bowl approach after the first one. And I think that them kind of learn from that, and having that flexibility should give people a lot of hope that they're going to remain flexible, they're going to remain progressive, and the chances of sustaining the success, even though you're absolutely right, once people win, they want to do exactly what they've done. I'm encouraged that what they're doing should give us good hope that they're going to continue to stay amongst the top teams in the league.
Yeah. After last season, I mean, Howie was pretty open about the fact that, hey, we're going to lose a lot of players. The good part of this is we're going to get a lot of draft picks, compensatory draft picks. Mm-hmm. They ended up somewhere in the middle because they ended up realizing they needed to hang on to James Bradbury and people like that. They couldn't just have that defense completely ravaged. But they're going to have a lot of extra picks the next couple of years. How beneficial is that to them, assuming they use them right?
Yeah, I mean, that will be the key. Listen, when you cut through everything, most teams are right about 50% of the time in their player evaluations. So if you have 10 picks and the teams you're competing to beat have 7, even if you're average, you should be gaining ground on them. You should be getting ahead of them. So extra picks, comp picks, and they'll make some trades in which they'll use up a pick here and there. They'll also make some trades where they'll get some picks back. I think it's reasonable to assume over the next couple of years they'll be amongst the league leaders in quantity of picks. And I just think that's an advantage wherever they are. Obviously, the higher the better, but wherever they are, the more picks you have, the more flexibility you have, the more opportunity you have by not even being necessarily better at evaluating than, let's say, the Cowboys, to continue to gain ground on them. If they're picking 7 times and you're picking 10 times and you're both hitting on the same percentage of players, you're getting better than them every time there's a draft. So I think this is a big advantage. And I also think the flexibility it gives you to feel like, if we really need to go out and get one guy and we got to trade, let's say, a 4th-round draft pick to do it, we shouldn't hesitate. We're still going to be most of our immediate competition number of picks. So there's a psychological element and a practical element to it, and I think it really should help them over the next few years.
Joe, I wanted to ask you about the running back situation around the league. It peripherally affected the Eagles. I mean, Miles Sanders was ran for 1,100 yards last year, became a free agent, and the Eagles just weren't interested in signing him to a second contract because of they just felt like a lot of other teams in the league are feeling right now that you can get somebody cheaper in the draft at a lower round. I mean, we're seeing, Ezekiel Elliott was released and is still out there unsigned. Dalvin Cook, who had 4 straight 1,100-yard seasons, is still unemployed and was released by the Vikings. Jonathan Taylor's holding out in Indianapolis. Saquon Barkley couldn't negotiate a long-term deal with the Giants, even though he's considered one of the top backs in the league. You go down the list. Leonard Fournette's still out there on the open market. J.D. McKissick. You said in April, I believe it was, when I talked to you for a story I was doing on this, that running back is the only position where there are more quality players than there is need. You don't need more than a high school economics course to figure out that when that happens, the price goes down and people get picked later. If there's an abundance of available talent at a position like there seemingly is at running back right now, why would you overpay anybody? I mean, the Chiefs are a perfect example. They won the Super Bowl last year and were with a 7th-round rookie running back, Isaiah Pacheco, who kind of put the dagger in the Eagles in the second half. of that Super Bowl game. So, I mean, what's happening here, and how is it permanent? I mean, is this the way the game is headed? Running backs are just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, so I mean, let's separate out the question. The first part about the running back position, the second part about the Eagles in the running back position. The people in the NFL get paid based on how the league views, or how much the league views them contributing to success or failure. And as the game evolved to more of a passing game, the importance of them in winning the Super Bowl. Remember, between the Chiefs and the Eagles, they've won 3 of the last 5 or 3 of the last 6 Super Bowls. And they've done it with no investment, in running backs.
Right.
So it's pretty obvious that you can, win a Super Bowl without having to invest a lot at that position. I think it's equally obvious you can't win a Super Bowl without having a significant investment in your defensive line and your quarterback. So, those teams have kind of reallocated their resources. And then, as you correctly quoted me, every position there is, as you get down to, let's say there are 2 starting guards, so you need 64 of them. By the time you get to 30 or 40, you're like, oh my gosh, now you're kind of holding your breath whether this guy's good enough to hold up against really good teams. So you simply have a shift in how much running backs contribute to who wins and who's standing at the end of the season, combined with an abundance of talent. So salaries have gone down. We shouldn't get crazy about it, because other than Barkley, which I actually think was a mistake by the Giants, the top running backs are still making what, quality safeties and quality guards and Pro Bowl tight ends are making. So it's not like, we threw the place kicker basket. But obviously, in an earlier stage, they were literally making what the top wide receivers and defensive ends, minus a little bit, were making. So it's a dramatic change. And the other thing that we've seen happen, and this is why I think they were fine getting rid of Sanders, is the passing game, 2 running backs, and now this has been evolving for the last decade at least, probably longer than that. The impact that running backs are having in the passing game has really been game-changing. And so the guy that you draft, 4th in the draft, like Elliott, who actually is okay in the passing game, but not a difference maker in the passing game, frankly, they became a little bit of Neanderthals. The teams that were drafting these, even the very, very top guys that were good in the passing game, didn't need to use more than a second, or usually many times. We got McCoy, Westbrook in the 3rd round, Deuce Staley in the 3rd round. Go back, this is, a long history of this. And these guys were falling because they were good runners, but they weren't the best runners. But we thought they were best, the combined, runners and passes. And then I alluded to it. I did want to get into a situation where I think they're anticipating what defenses may start doing against them, and having running backs that can be more helpful in the pass game than Miles Sanders was, at least on a consistent basis, was a right move. Now, they're going to hold their breath. They got their top 2 guys, and I'm counting penny when I say that, guys that have really struggled to stay healthy. Hopefully they use the depth at position to rotate a lot, that they have a better chance than it may look on paper to keep those guys all healthy. But I think the change was a combination of the move in the league, combined with them wanting to increase the opportunities that we were talking about earlier, to avoid what the defenses may start to do to see if they can slow down Jalen by having the running backs be an important part of the passing game.
Yeah. There's still some thought that Zeke may end up back with the Cowboys. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, I won't be shocked. It'd be a little surprised, but I won't be shocked. But, listen, if you use Zeke as a guy that can catch some screens and be great in the red zone and short yardage and stuff like that, and that's equivalent to how you're paying him and what your expectations are. Obviously he descended some last year, but I would welcome a guy like that on my team. So now if you're looking at the stud guy that's going to help you with 15 to 20 touches a game, I don't think he should be your lead guy. But in a role, if I was sitting out there right now and I had a team that needed somebody that would help in short yardage, red zone is the one place where it's generally better to run than pass if you can. And he's really good at that. So I would welcome if it was a need that I had. And I think he could be a good asset when somebody signs him here. As an Eagles fan, I would hope the Cowboys don't do that myself.
Yeah. Joe, we're going to break for a quick commercial. We'll come back. I'll ask you a couple more quick questions, and then I'll let you go.
Sounds good.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
And we're back with Joe Banner. A couple quick questions, and then we'll let Joe go. Joe, Sean Payton worked for you way back when, late 90s. He was the Eagles offensive with the Eagles. The comments he made about Nathaniel Hackett, called it his coaching last year in Denver the worst coaching job in the history of the game. I'm not asking you whether you agree or not. Hackett obviously didn't do a very good job, but what was your reaction to him saying that publicly about another coach?
Listen, I know Sean well, gave him his first job, worked with him for multiple years. I was not surprised by the directness. I was not surprised by the passion with which he said it. Listen, people can deny it if they want, and Hackett said it. There is kind of an understanding between coaches. Doesn't mean you can't ever say anything negative, but you kind of, take the hard edge off of it. You try to be empathetic to how tough a job it is. I'm sure Hackett is still kind of recovering from the challenges of those couple of years and getting fired. I mean, that's very hard to go through. But I took it as Sean trying to find a way to build and help rebuild Russell Wilson's confidence. And even though he probably could have toned it down a little bit, I don't fault him for doing that. I mean, in the end, his job is to make the Broncos the best team they can possibly be, make all of his players the best they can be. He's a new coach to most of them, so sending a message that I got your back, I believe in you, and it was a smart thing to do. So, he probably should have chosen his words a little more carefully and maybe a little less extreme, just understanding how challenging it is, how stressful all of this is. But as far as the Broncos going forward and really putting himself in a place where the players really, feel good about, I'm going to go all in for this guy because he's going in all in for me. Frankly, it was a smart strategic move. And I think we're going to see a totally different looking Denver team than we've done. Now they're playing in an impossible division, so I don't know what that translates in terms of the postseason. But I'll be shocked if Sean isn't really successful and Russell Wilson doesn't look like an old version of himself.
Yeah. Now, Aaron Rodgers obviously thinks a lot more of Nathaniel Hackett than Sean does. I don't know if you saw Hard Knocks last night, but they really clearly that this is an intense love affair. I'm curious. I mean, how do you think Aaron will do there with Hackett? Do you think the Jets are with Rodgers are a legitimate division contender right now?
Yeah, I'm hesitating when people are talking about them winning the Super Bowl. I just think they're stronger teams with better players, better coached. But as far as winning the division, I mean, I'm still picking Buffalo. I think people have gotten down on Buffalo for reasons I'm not completely clear about. I mean, I know the season ended a little abruptly and before people expected to, but I think that's an overreaction. It's a very good team, really good quarterback and outstanding coaching. So certainly they have a chance. They've built a good roster compared to where they were a few years ago. And my biggest worry is just an old quarterback with I'm going to say average, although I'm not even sure it's average, offensive line. It's a dangerous combination. And they've put all their eggs in that basket. So I still think the Bills probably win the division. I think the Jets have a pretty good chance of still making the playoffs. I'll be surprised if we see them playing on Super Bowl Sunday, though.
Yeah. Joe, thanks again for spending time with me. One of my favorite jobs when I was at the Inquirer the last few years was doing those weekly Q&As with you. I mean, they were informative, just like this session was. And I thank you for spending time with me. And I hope maybe later in the season, you'll agree to come back.
Sounds good. Always appreciate being with you and working with you with the 33rd team and doing this. So happy to.
You take care. And that'll just about do it for the second episode of Bird's Nest. Like I said earlier, the Eagles will play their first preseason game on Saturday night down in Baltimore. You'll probably see Jalen Hurts in the starters for the first series, just as you did last year, and then they'll disappear into the dust, and you won't see them until the season opener against the New England Patriots. So next week, I'm excited. We're going to have another a great guest, CBS analyst Charles Davis is expected to be with us. So that should be a fun show too. And until then, take care, everybody, and I'll see you in a